This is the last one for the day, so if everybody downstairs would like to come up and join us, we'd love to have you. I've got to take care of some business before we get rolling with the panel. We've got a lot of people to thank that sincerely haven't been thanked enough, so bear with me here just for the next couple of minutes. The New Belgium Brewery has been generous enough to give the Big Tent participants bikes to check out right out front. If you need to get somewhere, you need to get back and forth, use it. We do appreciate them setting that up and allowing our people to do that. We'd also like to thank our lead sponsors, DIG, Google, and Echo Driving USA for their support of the Big Tent. And then for everybody who ate lunch here today, we'd like to thank our food sponsor for the day, Udi's Sandwiches, which are available through the rest of the event right next door there at the Tattered Cover. And then, of course, a special thank you to the Alliance for Sustainable Colorado, to the Daily Co's, and to Progress Now for hosting the Big Tent. As I've said before, as you wrap up the day here, make sure you tell your friends and family to hit sustainablecolorado.org and continue this past today and past the week. So the next segment we've got is the next New Deal. I think we are in desperate need of another New Deal. And to guide us as to what that really means for us and for the next coming new administration, we have Alan Charney from U.S. Action to guide us and that panel, and we'll bring Alan up here in just a minute and guide you guys from there. But sincerely, as you meet some of the reps from these different companies who have brought this on to you, thank them for doing this. This was not a small undertaking, and we do appreciate their support. We'll bring them up here in just a minute.
I'd like to ask everyone to move up to the front, please, so we could be cozier. So people in the back, move up to the front. Come on. Come on. I know you're having a little difficulty understanding me because I'm from New York, but I said move to the front, please. Great. Well, my name is Alan Charney. I'm the program director of U.S. Action. And U.S. Action is a national federation of progressive state organizations working at the state and local level, but also at the national level to move a progressive agenda with our allies both inside and outside of Congress. And come 2009 with our allies inside the White House as well. And we have a panel here today because we want to talk about the most important agenda facing this country, which is the fight for a next New Deal, a fight for a plan to really invest in America's future, to turn our economy around, to create a new era of prosperity, opportunity, and security for the vast majority of Americans. And we have a distinguished panel here of people who have been working on this from several points of view. We have with us Anna Greenberg from GQR Research, a leading pollster, who has been doing some extensive polling on this agenda, on the historical analogy of the New Deal, on the reaction of different segments of the electorate, particularly the rising generation to this agenda, and we'll be hearing from her. We'll also be hearing from Congressman Keith Ellison from Minneapolis, a rising star in Congress and a future national leader in the fight for a next New Deal. And of course, we'll be hearing from William McNary, who is the president of U.S. Action and one of the greatest orators in this country. We will not see, we know. So let's talk a little bit about the next New Deal. We heard 3 hours of presentations from the Campaign for America's Future, an organization we work very closely with, about some of the pressing needs we have, and we heard Bob Kuttner talk explicitly about the need for a next New Deal, about the breakdown of the current economic paradigm that we've been living under, the assault that it's been under by the right wing, by the conservatives, and by the corporations, the breakdown of this paradigm, the fact that the vast majority of Americans are not benefiting from the false prosperity that we have, and the fact that the New Deal that had been created during the Roosevelt administration and then renewed during the 1960s under the Great Society and Civil Rights Program of the Democrats and Lyndon Johnson, that whole paradigm of how we created a mass prosperity is in crisis. And what we need is a new and a next New Deal to rebuild our economy on a different foundation. There are many parallels between what happened 70 and 80 years ago and what's happening now, but there are also many differences. I want to highlight a few of them so we understand that although we need to address some of the problems that were never fully addressed coming out of the New Deal and the Great Society, we also need to understand that we need to create a new economic paradigm, a next New Deal, which is going to, in many ways, be fundamentally different than what we had before. And what did we have before? We had a Great Depression which was magnified by a collapse of the economy, by massive joblessness, by a collapse of prices, by a collapse of income and profit, and a shrinkage of the economy. We had basically an economy that shrunk and collapsed because of overproduction and underconsumption. And what was needed then was an approach that the New Deal represented to recreate an incredible demand for goods and services in this economy so that we could have a new era of prosperity for the vast majority, and to redistribute income so that there was a social wage and a social basis that government provided so that the vast majority of Americans could prosper under this new economic arrangement. So we had Social Security. So we had massive public works programs. We had the National Labor Relations Act and a new foundation for the labor movement in this country, and so on. And then in the 60s, we had the great civil rights movement and the civil rights legislation, and a further expansion of the New Deal with things like Medicare and Medicaid, so that those who had been left out of the first New Deal could benefit from the second New Deal during the 1960s. But we have also seen tremendous transformations of the economy since then. A growth in corporate power, a massive growth in globalization, so that it becomes increasingly difficult to sustain the kind of New Deal economy that we had under the conditions of globalization. We have widening disparities of wealth and income again. We have new social cleavages within the society, particularly around immigration. We have a splintering of the old social contract, aided and abetted and moved on by the right wing, by the conservatives, and by the corporations. We have a different kind of economy that's going to require a different approach. And that's what the next New Deal and Invest in America's Future is all about. Because unlike the 30s, where it was sufficient to provide a social wage, to build strong unions, and to have good jobs with good wages to get the economy moving, and to have private investment do what it needed to do in order to build mass prosperity, where you had a virtuous cycle of rising income and rising prices and rising wages and rising profits. Today, we need something fundamentally different. We need to really have public investments in those areas that will build the foundation, the productive foundation for a new economy. And what does that mean? It means investing in people. It means investing in what the economists say is human capital. It means, for example, in the 21st century economy, it's no longer sufficient to have an elementary school education or a high school education. You have to have a college education. You have to have those skills and capacities so you can be creative, so we can compete globally, so that the jobs that are created are really deep and meaningful jobs where people can earn real money and can move and prosper and create new opportunities. That's going to require greatly expanded educational opportunities. We need health care for all, not just because health care is a right, but we can't have a prosperous 21st century economy without health care for all. We need that as an infrastructure foundation for the economy, just like we need green jobs and a sustainable economy, and we need to end our dependency on fossil fuels and move toward a clean economy. Why? Not just to protect the environment, but because that's a source of mass prosperity. That's a source of transforming the economy so that the majority benefit from it, so we can have greatly expanded jobs for middle class, middle income jobs, for people now who are having to take lower income and dead-end jobs. We need to have a new infrastructure, not just rebuild our physical infrastructure, but build a digital infrastructure that really puts us at the ground to have a 21st century economy. And we need to see those as public goods, which are provided as what any person in this country would have as a birthright. Not just a birthright to health care for all, not just a birthright to education from cradle to college, but a birthright, a broadband birthright as well. And we need to, at the same time, reform our financial institutions and reform them in such a way that that the speculation, which is now running rampant, is ending. A lot of that speculation has been fueled by the kind of tax cuts and corporate policies of the conservatives, and particularly the Bush administration, where now we have a situation where instead of overproduction and underconsumption, we have underproduction and overconsumption. We had this great run-up of assets, valuations across the board, and now what we're seeing is not a Great Depression, but a great devaluation. A great devaluation of assets across the board that it's not just affecting rich people, but it's affecting poor and moderate income people too, like in the values of their homes and in the credit card debt that they have and the student loans that they have. And all this debt, this massive debt, this house of cards, this casino economy is coming crumbling down piece by piece, section by section, rolling through the economy. And it's hurting, of course, those most vulnerable, those on the bottom, but now increasingly middle-income people as well. So that what we have now is a cost crunch crisis, not a depression of prices, but an actual increase of prices that have come together with this massive asset devaluation. So instead of a Great Depression, we have a great devaluation. And what do we need? We need a New Deal, but we need to think of it as something different. I like to think of it as the next New Deal. Sometimes, like on the plane here from Washington today, I said to myself, what do we need? A New Deal, and we need a new dream, a new American dream, and we need to create it. We need to create it through this type of investment program that we're talking about. Those are the challenges in front of us. When you look at what the next Congress and the next president have to do, we realize that this is a transformational moment. They come along once in a generation, once in a lifetime. This is the moment. This is the time. Whether or not it's in the minds of the people in the convention center, whether or not it's in the minds of the members of Congress and the next president of the United States, in a certain sense, it doesn't make any difference. When the moment arrives, when the urgency is there, when the mass movement and the grassroots movement is there, that will be the time in which the political leadership will be forced to act. Earlier today, I don't want to repeat everything that Robert Kuttner said, but what he basically said was, FDR wasn't prepared for the onslaught that came, but it came. Lincoln wasn't prepared for the onslaught that came, but it came. It came out of necessity. And they had to make a radical transformation. They had to move in that direction. And the same thing is true today. It's time to think bold and act big. And with that, I'd like to pass the baton to Anna Greenberg, who could substantiate this from the point of view of where the American people and the public is at. Anna, thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Is this on? Okay. It's going to be hard to match your passion, especially when you talk about numbers. You know, I want to basically agree with Alan when he said we're at a critical moment, a moment of radical transformation. We have an opportunity to sort of fundamentally change our national agenda, the priorities of government, to address the issues that have gone unaddressed in the last 8 years, but arguably even longer than that as our economy has changed and we have not, government, society has not caught up with it. We're at this critical moment in part because Americans agree. If you look at, I'm sure everybody here is a political junkie, and so you follow the polls, and you know that between 80 and 82% of people in this country say our country's on the wrong track, we're going in the wrong direction. That's an astonishing number. We haven't seen on every single indicator how people feel about how things are going, whether it's how they think the economy is doing, how things are going in the world, America's standing in the world. People are basically fundamentally pessimistic, and they're not particularly optimistic that either party can figure it out, but they're desperate for it. And change is sort of a cliche. We keep hearing, it's the word of this election, but it's real. I mean, people really do want change. Now, we spent a lot of time asking people, what is the change you're looking for? What is this about? And there's some cynicism. People think that politicians use the word change as kind of a generic word, not without much meaning. But they know what they want, and fundamentally, it's about the middle class being squeezed. There's no doubt that there is a feeling of deep, frustration and anxiety about the cost of living, in particular the cost of gas, but also the cost of healthcare, housing, education. People are struggling every day just to pay their bills. They're racking up credit card debt. But there's a longer-term issue here, a more fundamental anxiety about what it means to be middle class in this country, and is there still a middle class, and can you aspire to be middle class? And there's a real aspiration to restore the middle class. Recently, we did a survey for an organization called Public Interest Projects, trying to figure out what would this a bold agenda for America look like, trying to address these issues. And we looked at how do they think about the moment we're in? Is it a 1930s moment? Is it a 1990s moment? Is it a 1970s moment? And what's really interesting was that people fundamentally saw this as a 1930s moment. And it's actually worth reading what we tested in the survey, and it captures a lot of what Alan was talking about. The 1930s statement said this: "Our current situation most closely resembles the early 1930s, with our economy laid flat by speculative excesses on Wall Street and by rising inequality and stagnant wages. Like Franklin Roosevelt did, we must restore middle-class prosperity by investing in hometowns and regions throughout this country and by curbing the power of big business interests." And then I recommend you go to our website if you want to see the full research at greenbergresearch.com. But we go through to talk about what the agenda might look like that would help restore the middle class. Because we ask people, so what are you looking for? If we're sort of fundamentally in a 1930s situation, we're not in a kind of a moment of stagnation or a sort of a minor recession, but a sort of fundamental economic transformation, and we're fundamentally pessimistic and very much focused on sort of this concept of restoring the middle class. So what are they looking for specifically? First, investing money here at home. Now, a piece of this is looking at Iraq and spending $10 billion a month in Iraq. I've been doing research on Iraq since before the war started, and from the very beginning, people had lots of issues about why we went to war, how it was executed, how the management of different contractors and no-bid contracts. But at the end of the day, the very strongest critique, the thing that bothered people most, was that we were spending so much money in Iraq when we had so many problems here at home. That's in 2003, 2004, the first ask for $87 billion. That $87 billion ask that the president made was a symbol for people of how much this war was costing. And interesting, people were sort of ahead of us in politics. They were worried about the fact that we had lots of problems here, and we were spending all this money abroad, even though at that time, if you asked me what's the most important problem in this country, they might not have said the economy, or we weren't seeing that kind of. At any rate, what would they like us to use this money for? Invest in jobs, healthcare, retirement, education, everything that's in the investment agenda that Alan was talking about. But there's a big difference in 2008 that is, I think, as progressives, if we don't address it, we will fail, which is dealing with accountability and reform. FDR had to make the case that government could work and improve people's lives, and he did make that case effectively, and Johnson made that case, and even Bill Clinton made that case, even as he devolved things to public-private and locally. He made that case that government worked. We have now had a period of time where we've had a president similar in some ways to Reagan, at least rhetorically, and that government doesn't work. But moreover, we've had a government captured by special interests, by lobbyists, and there's deep, deep cynicism that government can actually do anything for people. And so if we don't couple this investment agenda with some kind of reform and accountability, we're asking people, people's concern about taxes and deficit is very real. We have to figure out how to pay for this. This is a very real concern. But fundamentally, if we can't convince people that we could do this effectively, that an Obama administration could do it effectively, that a Democratic Congress could do it effectively, that it could really work, people are going to be, remain fundamentally pessimistic, and the moment will be past. And there's a piece of it that's about making sure that we have reform around the role of special interests. It's a big piece, but also around making sure that government works well, is efficient. We're not wasting people's money. People are working incredibly hard. They're incredibly tax sensitive, legitimately so, and they don't want their money wasted. Now, the stakes are very high in this election. We all know this. But there's a piece of it that I just want to sort of end on that I think makes it particularly poignant, which is to look at changes in our electorate and who's participating this year. And as you all know, there's been a surge in registration and turnout among people who are younger, people under 30. Unprecedented, historic. We could have turnout rates that we haven't seen since the 1970s or earlier. If you ask people who are younger, what do they care about most? It's economic issues. And it's literally feeling like they just don't have enough money to get by, and that there are no good paying jobs that are going to allow them to have economic and financial security, and that they are living off their credit cards to get by, to actually pay their bills. In fact, in the survey that we released today on younger voters, we asked them, what's your #1 priority? And it was paying off their debt, because they know where their debt's taking them. And they're incredibly optimistic that they believe that if Barack Obama is elected, that things that they care about most, they're going to be acted upon, that we're going to get out of Iraq, that gas prices are going to be lower, that we're going to figure out how to provide better paying, good paying jobs so they have enough money to make it. And I would argue that we're going to have to figure out collectively how to deliver something to people who are fundamentally pessimistic, desperate for something different, supportive of the priorities that I think we all share, but have real questions about the ability of government to deliver. So I think that fundamentally remains our challenge. Thank you.
Whoop, hey, gotta watch it around here. Okay, you can just, yeah, go ahead.
Hey everybody, my name's Keith Ellison, and you know, we are building roads, we are purifying water. We're just not doing it in America. The fact is that the American people, we've seen the last 8 years of a particular kind of philosophy, political philosophy that said basically you're on your own. Don't worry about fixing Social Security, just get private accounts, your own. Don't worry about fixing public schools, just get this voucher, you're on your own. Don't worry about health care, just get your HSA and go on your way. Or we're not gonna have any kind of defined benefit, you just get a 401k and lots of luck with that. People have experienced this and they want change. For all the brilliance of our Democratic nominee, he didn't tell us we wanted change and now we're sure we want it. He divined our sentiment that we needed it. And we needed a change, not a change from you're on your own to the public good. A change from the common to the common good, a change that says, look, we are all in this thing together and we need to come together as a community, as a people, as a nation, even as a world. And I think that's critical to our discussion about how we build a new or the next New Deal. I could run down a litany, so could you, about what we need. But I think that I'd like to hear people in the community talk much more about the common good, about our common wealth, about our shared life together. We need to talk more about how we are in this thing together and how we cannot allow anyone to be just out there on the margins of society. It's going to take us some real energy to squeeze out all the false barriers that divide us. Part of the next New Deal is a frontal assault on these latent bigotries and exclusivisms that we have still lingering in our midst. We've got to really deal with this issue of immigration, deal with this issue of gender equality, deal with this issue of LGBT rights, and we've got to deal with these issues not from the standpoint of we progressives know and you rest of people don't, but from the perspective of truly listening to people and letting them share their anxieties about their future. So with that, with the idea that I'm talking about, this idea that brings in the litany of the things that we all care about, this idea of the common good, the idea of starting out with we need everybody, you don't know where the lightning is going to strike. Every creative talent in America needs to be fully utilized and maximized. Let me just talk about this next New Deal from a legislative standpoint. I want to start out from a legislative standpoint with the idea that we've got to have a true commitment to a minimum wage that does not need to be elevated every time we develop the political will in Congress to do so. It took us 10 years last time just to increase the minimum wage. When are we going to index the minimum wage to inflation to make sure that people can stay afloat, to make sure that we set that minimum wage at a point where if you work that minimum wage, that you will not be living below the poverty line? That is an idea legislatively I hope we can all get behind, indexing minimum wage to inflation so that we don't have to go pass a new law every 10 years depending on who's in office. Trade. We've got to have a real conversation about trade. All of you know fair trade, not free trade, but the fact is that Minnesota, my state alone, is a net loser on NAFTA. We've got to really confront this new era that we're moving into, and perhaps even a Democratic nominee who becomes president, on trade. We began this dialogue in the Congress. One of the first trade things that came up around trade was the Peru Free Trade Agreement. We were able to mount an offensive against it. It was introduced on the floor and it passed, but a lot of people voted against it, so much so that Colombia never really came up. In fact, we had an anti-Colombia Free Trade Agreement vote, and I think legislatively it's because a lot of people like yourself stood up and said, this is a problem. We're not going to do a trade deal where, you know, literally 17 trade unionists in Colombia have been killed in 2008 alone. It's also important to understand how trade, and we got to articulate how trade is related to immigration. The fact is, if we are subsidizing corn, dumping it in Mexico, obviously, when you wipe out my Mexican farm, I'm coming north to work, probably as a busboy in a hotel near you. And we've got to understand that reality. People don't want to leave. Think about it. Why would you leave your family, your friends, your language, your culture to come here unless you had to? That's the situation people are in. Because of our ag policy and our trade policy, we've got to deal with it, and the progressive voices must raise the clarion call and make the connections. If we want to deal with world poverty, we've got to deal with our own agriculture and trade policy. Fact is, farms in West Africa, the Caribbean, places like that, when you look across the broad cross-section of the world and you see these billion people who live on less than $1 a day, when you see the, 30,000 people who died of malnutrition last night, we've got to slow down and say we've got to get a grip on ag policy and trade. And so legislatively, I hope that we can gain success around that. Retirement. Look, for those folks who have cut a path and worked their lives and made a way for you and me, they deserve some respect once they have worked their lives through. And I'm not talking about one of those good jobs where you basically spend your time counting money. I'm talking about folks who work hard, who need to retire after doing waitress work or construction work or hard work. You know, they got to be able to retire. Moving the retirement age up is absolutely no option. What we need to do is we need to muster the political will to snap the cap off Social Security tax so that we got everybody paying into it. Right now, a little less than $100,000 after that, you're not being taxed, which means essentially that we have the middle class, carrying the burden for everybody else. And the fact is, we need to have the cap blown off Social Security, and then we could solve any Social Security problems and then begin to exempt people at the bottom end of the income scale so that folks can really keep some of their money. I think that would be a very important legislative thing, something that I'm working on, and I hope you all would support me in doing. Let's talk about the right to organize. I'm the legislator, so I'm talking about legislation that I believe we should think about. Before we talk about the right to organize, I want to talk about our unions and say I love you guys, I believe in what you do, but I think that you need to look at your budgets, limited as they may be, and instead of giving max out checks to Democrats who might not even vote your way, I'm in the House, I know it does happen, why not take some of that budget and put much more of it into organizing? Organize, that's where, look, we got a smaller number of people we're trying to organize. We're fighting over who's going to represent this group or that group when we have a shrinking and declining group of people who are unionized. And in that same vein, we gotta build true international unions. Hey, look, if Cargill and IBM and 3M and you guys name them can be international, why can't the workers be international? Now, I know we got international unions, but do we have truly international unions? We've got to truly throw the money in the pot to make sure that we are forging strong labor relations across the globe. It's got to happen. Also, no doubt about it, one thing we should demand and expect from this president is not just passage of the Employee Free Choice Act. He's already committed to passing it. It already passed through the House, and you know that the chamber has $50 million they've already agreed to throw in to stop it. We've got to make sure that this time the stakes are going to be higher, the chances of it becoming law are greater, and therefore the opposition will be greater. If we can get ourselves together and create a national will, a national consensus around the Employee Free Choice Act, we will improve the lives of workers and working people and middle-class families throughout this country. And let me just say this. We can talk about the decline in the economic fortunes of the middle class over the last several years, but what about the political power decline of the middle class? Who's running Washington? Who used to run Washington? Who had a greater stake before? Whose stake is declining? As these folks use their tax breaks, they go buy lobbyists to try to convince people like me that rich people don't have enough money and poor people have too much money. So let me just, I'm getting toward the time when I'm going to sit down because I want the dialogue, but I haven't mentioned, but I want to mention two other things that I think are critical. I want to mention H.R. 676, universal health care, absolutely essential legislation. I am a true Obama supporter. No doubt I'm going to wear many pairs of shoes out getting him elected. But I'm telling you right now, I am not with any universal health care plan which basically forces you and me to buy health care and then tries to subsidize and give a subsidy to the insurance company to take care of the indigent. No, we need universal health care just like 37 other countries have. We need to have national health insurance. It's time for it, and we've got to be smart, and we cannot allow old ideology to stop us. Why in the world doesn't GM support H.R. 676? They spend more money on health care than Steel. It's in their economic interest. It's my job and yours to help them see that. And I think we need to get on that and find friends everywhere we can find them. I had a H.R. 676 forum in my district, standing room only for the first one when John Conyers came, and the next one, we didn't have any big fancy people coming, but we still had a full audience and people really discussed this issue all night. I said, I'm not going to run through the bill because you guys already know the facts. You wouldn't be here if you weren't leaders to begin with. The question is, how are we going to convince other people to agree with us? It's fundamentally an organizing challenge. People know what they need to know about this stuff. And I just want to say, I can't get off the stage without saying that we really got to recognize that we have a massive remodeling of the financial services regulation regime coming up in the next year or so. Barney Frank has made it very clear the problem that we got into is unacceptable. Now, you know how these big corporations act, right? First of all, they deny the problem. Then they start attacking the people proposing the solution. Then, when change is inevitable, they try to get on the train, but just make sure their seat is nice and cushy and nothing changes for them. And then when we end up passing something, it's not really what we wanted, right? We've got to say, we've got to get into this financial services regulation debate now, right now. We've got to impact the Fed. We've got to impact the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the FDIC, Fannie Freddie. We've got to engage at this point, and we need all these smart financial minds to say, what is the working people's agenda when it comes to financial services regulation? Already, you know, the great Carol Maloney, and please give her a hand, she's a great woman, introduced a bill called the Credit Card Holders Bill of Rights. I'm proud to tell you that I introduced the first credit card reform bill of the 110th Congress, but I'm still low on the poll, so when Chairwoman Maloney said, I got the big bill, I jumped on her train. But my point is, once the Fed admitted that everything that she put in that bill was right, banning universal default, banning double cycle billing, banning pay to, now actually, she tried to ban pay to pay, but then she couldn't get it in. Then Gary Ackerman, a congressman from New York, introduced an amendment to ban pay to pay, and it didn't succeed. And you should have seen those sharks swarming outside the Financial Services Committee room who were all, you know, promising and threatening to make sure that that amendment didn't pass. Everybody know what pay to pay is? Yeah, you got to pay your bill, right? Does that offend you? It offends me. Anyway, let me sit down. And the gentleman has asked me to please close, so I will close. And I'm sure that we all have a treat in store. Thank you.
Personally, I could have listened to Congressman Keith Ellison talk all day, but they tell us we have to get out of here in a few minutes, and I want to make sure y'all have some time for questions. My name is William McNary, and I'm the president of U.S. Action. Everybody's talking about change. Everybody's talking about change. Obama had a slogan, change, has a slogan, change you can believe in. Hillary Clinton, change with experience. McCain, change you can't afford. Everybody's talking about change, but one thing, like my Reverend Lead, my late minister used to say, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Thus, everybody talking about change don't really mean change. Are we going to get real progressive change? Are we going to get small change? Or are we going to get chump change? You know, I've had all three, so I know the difference. But one thing about it is people in this country are hungry for change. And this is a critical time in our history where we can turn our country, indeed our nation, around. We have a historic opportunity right now, today, in our grasp to shape the future. And the 2008 elections will be an important mile marker on the journey for profound, progressive social change. And make no mistake about it, activists, it's an important mile marker. The political process is a reflection of social power. The late Ghanaian leader Kwame Nkrumah once said that political power is the necessary prerequisite to social and economic power. And our opponents know this. Why do you think they spend so much time discounting and miscounting and undercounting and don't counting our votes, marginalizing, minimalizing, and criminalizing our votes? They know that in a democracy, that power equally distributed through votes can be used to increase public control of wealth and resources. They know that winners of elections get to decide who gets how much of 5 things: who gets how much income, who gets how much education, who gets how much health care, who gets how much housing, and who gets how much justice. And your vote this year will determine who will be the decider. And let me be clear, there is a clear, bright line distinction of a President John McCain who will decide, or President Barack Obama who will decide. But that being said, the 2008 elections will only be an important mile marker. It is the urgency by which things get done, electing a president and electing a Congress. But doing that is not enough. We, in this room and beyond, must create and build a movement based on progressive ideals, for history will be made only like history has always been made, not by heroes and sheroes, not by saviors, not by smart people. History will only be made when ordinary people get in motion, natural men and women. And so right now, I am asking everybody in this room and beyond to put a little super in your natural, a little extra in your ordinary. For the next 10 years will be the most critical time for the progressive movement. Not only do we have an opportunity to redefine politics, we have the opportunity to reshape history in our lifetime. Never believed, Jeff, I would see a time like in the 60s. But right now, what's going on now, if you weren't around in the 60s, it reminds me of that time. There's an opening. People don't just want little change. They want big, bold, progressive change. And God knows if we're going to get that kind of change, we as organizers cannot be timid nor tepid, but tough and tenacious. We can't be weak and whining, but willing and winning. We have to be aggressive progressives, in it to win it. We must have the moral courage to stand on the front side of history and shape it. And we must have the confidence to believe that we can win. We can win. The most pitiful sight I have ever seen in all of my life is an army of progressives all suited up for battle with no expectation of winning. But if we are to change the course of this nation, this can't just be that we are to the left of America and we are righter and we are smarter and we are better and we are purer than everybody else. We have to see ourselves in the center of people's lives, because that's where we live. That's where we are. It's not us. It is our political direction that is off center. So we must change the nature of our political experience. We must instill in people the will to fight for justice. And while it is very, very, very important that we speak to people's immediate needs, we have to change the status quo and give people the skills that they need to change their lives. We must instill in people the will to force change, not just begging for mercy, but demanding justice. The next New Deal, in 1932, in the middle of a Great Depression, President Franklin Roosevelt swept into office with the promise of bold economic reforms. And although conservative critics of the day said it wouldn't work, the same one watched the economy collapse and did nothing. Policies implemented in the New Deal stabilized the banking system, cut skyrocketing unemployment, paid farmers and workers fair wages, and created a foundation for a generation of economic growth. But I don't think anybody in this room is politically naive. The only reason that President Roosevelt was able to implement his bold economic agenda is because people were desperate. The country had voted for him. It was a no-confidence vote for the Republicans to fix this problem. There was a clear mandate for change. Thus, the only way that we are going to break the stranglehold of corporate interests and piles of lobbyist money is to speak collectively in one loud, sustained voice that this has got to happen. We must give our new president a mandate for change. The greatest concentration of power is in this place, it's in this city today. And bloggers and alternative, I'm a journalist, by the way, I got a journalism degree. And I truly believe that the pen is mightier than the sword. And the balance of power is shifting away from traditional journalists to bloggers and new media. And each one of you sitting in this tent today, you have the unprecedented, am I pandering? You have the unprecedented ability to call for a mandate for change by writing about it in your blogs, by emailing your elected representatives in your constituency, by staging press events and demonstrations around the country. Just recently, we had several visionary members of Congress, Donna Edwards, Debbie Stabenow, Frank Pallone, and others, Keith Ellison. By the way, Keith, is there something in the Minnesota water? I mean, you all give us politicians like Paul Wellstone, and now we have a Keith Ellison in that tradition. Give him a hand, my God, for fighting congressmen. Quote, and then I'll sit down. Mopping up this mess is going to take two things we don't see enough of in Washington: vision and courage. Mayor Michael Bloomberg of New York, he called for investing in infrastructure projects across the country that will reduce unemployment, increase local revenues, and attract billions in private investments. If he can call for that, we can call for a new deal. And by the way, this is more than just a set of policies. The Invest in America's Future, the next New Deal, is a political program that wraps these policies into a coherent and popular platform for progressives like Keith Ellison to run on and win. We know that America supports it. This defines the change that the people want, and it sets the stage for Congress to enact it. We know that these ideas are popular, but let me be clear. Impeachment is popular. Gas taxes are popular, but that's not a program for change, and this is. Health care. By the way, let me agree with my friend Congressman Keith Ellison that we need to make sure that the focus of our health care debate is on creating a public plan and at the same time keeping the pressure on the insurance industry. And though single payer, the HR 676 may be one way to get there, there are other ways. And so we look forward to having the political fight where we'll be having your back. And we'll work on the policy fight as soon as we push back those forces that don't want health care reform. Is that a deal? That a deal? Well, let's shake on it. All right. So we got your back on the political fight. There's more than one way to get there. Creating non-exportable infrastructure jobs. I'll close. I was brought up Baptist. I closed more than once. but I guarantee you, this is my last close. USA Today, July 25th. Billions needed to shore up bridges. The fatal collapse of a bridge in Minneapolis a year ago jolted states into better inspections of the nation's 600,000 bridges, but they aren't coming up with the billions of dollars needed to ensure that all the structures are sound. The plunge that killed 13 people when the span crumbled into the Mississippi River was a wake-up call to take care of the aging bridges, said Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell. We can't wait for another Minneapolis. It would cost $9.4 billion a year for 20 years to eliminate all the deficiencies in the USA, according to the latest estimate. We will see more bridge collapses. States are facing cuts in federal funding next year because of a $3.2 billion shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund. Let's see. $9.4 billion a year for 20 years, figured out to about $188 billion, and we've currently spent $540 billion in the war in Iraq. That means for a fraction of what we spent in Iraq, we could rebuild every one of our bridges and not only save lives, not only get us from here to our homes, our doctors, our grocery stores, and our churches faster, but we could also create good, non-exportable jobs, construction jobs, inspection jobs. You can't repair Minnesota bridges in China. You can't trust Iowa bridges in Mexico. You can't inspect South Carolina bridges in India. Neither Al Gore nor George W. Bush ran on a war on terror in 2000. But once terrorists struck on September 2001, this president and this government made a decision to go to war, and we've currently spent $540 billion. So this is not about price. This is about priorities, and we need to change our nation's priorities. It is time, past time, to bring our valiant men and women, our brave sons and daughters, our heroic brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers home to us, not 100 years from now, not 10 years from now, but right now. Enough is enough. And that's where you all come in. We're building a national movement on the outside. He's going to be on the inside championing us. And you all are going to be out there writing about it so we can attract more people to this movement. And if we are successful in organizing, let the record reflect that on this afternoon, Tuesday, August the 26th, 2008, that we, a group of progressives in this room, met with a greater determination to take this country away from those deficit-creating, treaty-breaking, environment-desecrating, inequality escalating, influence-peddling, union-busting, fear-mongering, torture-condoning, secret-keeping, memo-leaking, eavesdropping, document-shredding, race-baiting, civil liberties taken, free speech-hating hypocrites, and give America back to the people. The time is now, right now, for the next New Deal. I look forward to seeing you on the front lines in victory.
We're going to have some questions. We have passed out some buttons that say nextnewdeal.org. You should go to the site. You can get there on your smartphones or your iPhones or whatever phones you have and sign up. Support the Next New Deal. You'll be hearing more from us. Spread the word on it. But let's now take some questions and comments from everybody. So who would like to start off?
Hi.
Yes.
My name's Charles Chamberlain. My question is, I totally agree with the concept that with healthcare we need to get companies like, that are spending billions or millions and billions of dollars on healthcare now behind the idea of a national plan. My question is, first of all, obviously it's a big step to get them involved when they seem to be so against it. But once we get them involved, how do we keep the insurance companies from hijacking the process like they so constantly do with all their money and make sure that we get a plan that really works?
Good question. You want to?
I think we ought to take them out of the equation. That's why I support H.R. 676. I think it's important to advocate for a real single-payer system now because, politics and in the policy fight, I think they need to go on at the same time. because I'm quite certain, I mean, that if the insurance companies are left in place to dole out benefits as they choose, we will be in a very undesirable space after we get universal health care. So I think it's an organizing challenge. I think we need to get people all over the country demanding universal single-payer health care.
So as everyone can, am I on here? Yeah. As everyone can tell, this is a current debate within the progressive community about the best way to proceed. And one approach, which is a single-payer approach, there's another approach, which Healthcare for America Now, which is a coalition that U.S. Action is part of, takes, is building a very strong, powerful public plan, but understanding that to win support for that public plan over time, it will require a situation where there will be a dual market for a while, where there'll be a public plan and still be private plans. And this is something that we need to struggle with as a collective community to figure out the best way forward. But one thing we know, that whether there's a move toward single payer or a move toward having a large public plan still with the private plans in existence, we know what the healthcare insurance industry is going to do. They're going to fight it tooth and nail. And we need to keep our eyes on the prize. Our eyes on the prize right now is to prevent the health insurance industry from preventing any forward momentum toward health care for all.
Let me add this. The debate is not going to be, in Washington. The debate right now is going to be whether we actually have a public plan. The other side is going to fight us tooth and nail on having a public plan. Healthcare for America Now says 3 things. Number 1, you can keep the insurance you have now if you want it. Number 2, you can change to another insurance plan if you want that. And number 3, if you don't want either, you can enroll in a strong public plan that's just as good as members of Congress like Congressman Ellison has. The fear is that if the insurance companies stay in the mix, they will continue to give us more and more, less and less, while we continue to pay more and more. How we counter that is by saying that in addition to having a strong public plan, we must also have strong oversights over the insurance industry to make sure they don't prohibit them from cherry picking, prohibits them from denying people with pre-existing conditions, that prohibits them from making money and not putting money back in the system. We think that's the best way. But again, let's be clear that I see Congressman Ellison is a strong champion of ours, and single payer meets every one of our criteria.
We have time for a couple of more questions.
One more question.
Barack Obama originally talked about having all the hearings on C-SPAN, and I thought that was a really great idea. Has that been floated anymore? And if so, how would they enforce it and make it work?
Well, we can't speak for President Obama, but I tell you what, I think what his commitment was, President Obama I'm trying to be good here, but my understanding is that what he wants is public accountability and public interface. So what our goal is, though, if he has that, what will happen is if we are not organized, then the other side, it would seem like a good idea, but the other side would organize so they could control or try to control the public hearings. So I think it's a good idea, but let me offer a word of caution. If we are going to do it, let's just make sure we in the public organize to make sure our voices don't get drowned out by the interests who have the money, the time, and the inclination to participate.
Okay, do we have time for another question?
No, we're done. Oh, no,
Any other questions,
I don't want to make
comments?
my girl mad here.
All right.
Okay, I want to thank the panelists, Anna Greenberg. I want to thank Congressman Ellison. I want to thank William McNary. And nextnewdeal.org. Go to the website, sign up. You'll be hearing from us. And let's move those buttons around and let's move this theme around. Thank you. Okay.
For everyone that's still here, please stick around. New Belgium Brewery has been so kind as to supply a happy hour for us. There'll be some refreshments and some snacks, so do stick around for the next hour for the New Belgium sponsored happy hour. Thank you so much.
This is a defining moment in our history.